spending like over $1 trillion on interest. If this continues, the country will become de facto bankrupt.
I don't think we're ever going to accept cuts in critical programs to fund tax breaks for billionaires.
If you just do a cold turkey, there's got to be a lot of unintended consequences that our members need to think through, whether it's a red state or blue state.
This virus can have severe and deadly consequences. We want to urge our communities to be vigilant.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Tonight, the bubble and the bot. President Trump held his first cabinet meeting today where White House special advisor and world's wealthiest man, Elon Musk, stood over the assembled cabinet secretaries and told them that a fair number of their employees are either dead or don't exist. Musk provided no evidence of this, but the president allowed that it might be true. Essentially, that the federal workforce might well be riddled with bots, things that look real but are not. Musk, of course, would know something about bots. When he took over Twitter, he vowed to remove them from the platform. Bots, of course, are fake accounts run by computers or artificial intelligence. They amplify content, often spreading misinformation or hate speech. As election year 2024 progressed, the bot problem on Twitter, renamed X, did not go away. In fact, research from Clemson University and the University of Southern California suggests the bot syndrome got worse, not better. The bubble, that is a reference to Mr. Trump saying any federal employee who did not respond to Musk's now somewhat famous "what did you do last week" email were, quote, on the bubble, meaning they could be fired over this episode alone. The president said this even as some of the cabinet secretaries listening to him had informed their employees they were not compelled to respond to Musk. Last week, Musk, again without verifiable evidence, said bots in the form of dead people were collecting Social Security benefits. Musk has failed to prove there is a bot problem with Social Security or, for that matter, the federal workforce. But there was a bot problem at Twitter, and there still is at X. And Musk seems pretty okay with that. Of course, much more came from this cabinet meeting, and we begin there with Olivia Rinaldi at the White House and Caitlin Huey-Burns on Capitol Hill. Olivia, it's great to see you. President Trump is many things. Among the things he is routinely is he is a atmosphere or scene setter, and he did so with Elon Musk at the cabinet meeting. Let's all listen to how he set the stage.
Is anybody unhappy with Elon? If you are, well, throw him out of here. Is anybody unhappy? They have a lot of respect for Elon and that he's doing this, and some disagree a little bit, but I will tell you, for the most part, I think everyone's not only happy, they're thrilled.
A round of applause, Olivia.
Yeah, certainly, Major. What an incredible scene there, seeing Elon Musk, the world's richest man, holding court at Trump's first cabinet meeting, assembling the entirety of his cabinet for his second administration. And yet a significant amount of that time was dedicated to Elon Musk talking to the press, at least ahead of that meeting. Trump addressing what Musk is doing ahead of that, also joking with his cabinet that if they disagreed with what Musk is doing, he would throw them out of there. That was a comment that was also met with applause. Trump also said that for the most part, people within his cabinet are happy with what Musk is doing, but he did contend that on that OPM email, the Office of Personnel Management email that you mentioned, that's the infamous 5 things that you did last week email, that some of his cabinet secretaries did not like that email and told their people not to reply to it. He said he understood that reason, but it does create an interesting atmosphere for sure when you do see someone like Elon Musk essentially talking about all the things that they are doing ahead of this cabinet meeting. On those government cuts from Doge, Trump also said that his administration has to cut down the size of government. He called the size of government bloated, sloppy. He suggested that there are people that aren't doing their job, but people that also just don't exist and are being paid a government salary. Now, we've asked the White House to clarify exactly what that means and who is duplicating jobs or perhaps dead and doing those jobs. We will update you when we have that answer. But I also want to make one last point, and that's Chris Wright, the energy secretary, was just here on the White House front lawn where he was talking with some reporters, and he was asked about Elon Musk specifically in that meeting and his role in government. He likened him to an auditor or a contractor, saying that essentially what he's doing is making suggestions, but it's ultimately going to be up to those cabinet secretaries. And one last point that he made to us, he said one misunderstanding I should correct. The press were in there at the start of the meeting, and it was essentially a press conference. But once the press left, the dialogue among cabinet members back and forth around all of these ideas actually started, meaning that some of these cabinet secretaries, although they're putting on a good face, perhaps they're still having those dialogues behind those closed doors without the press in the room. Major.
The definition of dialogue to be continued. And Caitlin, we look forward to any updates you can provide tonight or tomorrow night or some frequent night from the White House about those fictitious or dead federal employees. Caitlin, I want to talk to you about last night's very big victory for House Republicans and, by extension, House Speaker Mike Johnson. It was a close vote. It was unclear hours before whether they had the votes. They got them. The budget resolution passed. The process continues. But as we understand it, Elon Musk met with the Speaker after passage of the budget resolution last night. To what effect are Doge efforts shaping or influencing this process?
Yeah, we've seen that President Trump and Elon Musk have become kind of the de facto whips of this Republican conference. I mean, House Speaker Mike Johnson is the speaker, but a lot of these members are taking their cues from Donald Trump and Elon Musk. In fact, Donald Trump was on the phone with lawmakers up until the very last minute last night and yesterday, trying to get them to support this bill. The House Speaker has said that these cuts that Doge is seeking or, wanting to make, they want to incorporate all of that into this reconciliation process, this effort on their part to cut government spending. Now, House Republicans in that framework they passed last night call for $2 trillion in spending cuts. And so they're going to incorporate what they are seeing from Doge. But, Major, it's really fascinating up here on Capitol Hill because we've seen over the past several weeks, there's been this question of where is Congress? While the White House is making all of these executive actions, while Elon Musk is making, essentially direct cuts to these agencies, where is Congress exerting its autonomy here? They're trying to do it through this budget process, but we also heard from the Speaker yesterday that they are kind of happy about what Musk is doing because, in their view, he's able to unlock things that they haven't been able to kind of get inside agencies the way that he says Congress hasn't been able to. So all of that is coming as you have some Republicans up here hearing from their constituents also concerned about some of these cuts in their own districts, even conservative Republican districts. And there is a concern among some lawmakers that the way in which Musk and the president are going about these cuts isn't really, is kind of too big, too broad, and they want to scale it down or at least be more precise about it. So you're seeing that kind of clash, that tension up here on Capitol Hill, at least as it comes to these cuts.
And Caitlin, you mentioned some of the blowback or conversation that members of Congress are getting from their constituents. We're going to have more on that a little bit later in the show during our reporter panel. Olivia, I want to ask you about this memo that came out that asks for agency heads for reorganization plans and leaves open the very real prospect of even deeper cuts to the federal workforce. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Major, this amounts to a massive reordering of what the federal government actually looks like. Our Kristen Brown obtained this memo from the Office of Personnel Management and essentially went out to all leaders of the executive branch, asking them to submit what they're calling reorganization plans. Those will be due in the next 2 weeks by March 13th. And it asks agencies to seek to consolidate, reading from the memo now, areas of the agency organizations chart that are duplicative, consolidate management layers where unnecessary layers exist, and also to maximally reduce outside use of consultants and contractors. Now, Major, you've been in Washington a long time. There are a lot of consultants and a lot of contractors in this town. This is going to massively change what the federal government looks like and the operations of it. I should note that there are people that are exempt from this. That includes law enforcement, border security, national security, immigration enforcement, public safety responsibilities. Think about those air traffic controllers that are federal workers, and military personnel. But ultimately, this memo is asking really for a consolidation and a scaling down of federal government, something to watch for over the next couple of weeks as we start to see from these agencies exactly who is being cut and in what jobs. We know already today from Lee Zeldin in that cabinet secretary meeting where he said about 65% of the EPA is going to be cut. That's one agency that's certainly on the chopping block and going to be scaled down significantly.
Olivia, thank you very much. Caitlin, very quickly to you, because this came up last night. Congresswoman Victoria Spartz, Republican, who was leaning no, voted for the budget resolution after talking to the president, and the president assuring her that they would, quote, in this process, save health care and make it better. Any idea what he meant by that?
Well, a lot of the conversation around this budget has centered around what to do with Medicaid. I mentioned they're looking for $2 trillion to cut from government spending. This bill asked the Energy Committee, the Commerce Committee, to look at least how to cut $800 billion in spending. This committee oversees Medicaid, Medicare, and other programs. So while the bill doesn't outline or doesn't say exactly you need to cut Medicaid, there is a directive to cut spending, and this committee oversees those health care programs. You heard from some moderate members who represent Medicare districts or districts that rely on Medicaid, and expressing concern about this. This will remain a sticking point moving forward, because remember, what happened last night is really just bullet points, an outline, a blueprint. Now they have to go through and actually fill this out with policy. Not to mention, they have to sync up with the Senate on that blueprint altogether. So we're still a long way away from seeing any policy reforms here. And that essentially underscores the idea that, the executive branch is trying to go at this alone in a lot of ways. Congress still has to fund these programs.
Caitlin Huey Burns on Capitol Hill, Olivia Rinaldi, North Lawn of the White House. Thanks so very much. President Trump says Ukraine's President Zelensky will come to the United States Friday to sign a new mineral deal, creating some access for the United States to minerals in Ukraine. More on what that could mean for both countries and the ongoing war with Russia. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. There's been lots of back and forth between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky the last week. A lot of words, but those words and whatever they have meant or didn't mean or how they hurt or didn't hurt did not prevent the two sides from hashing out what appears to be a deal that the Ukrainian leader will come to the White House to sign Friday about U.S. access to rare earth minerals in Ukraine. I want to talk to our CBS News national security contributor, Sam Vinograd, about this and a lot of other things that came up in the lengthy cabinet meeting press conference with the president. So what do you think is the importance, after all the rhetoric back and forth, of working out this arrangement, which appears to be signed, sealed, and practically delivered?
Well, this arrangement fundamentally redefines how U.S. security assistance will be provided, at least during the Trump term. The United States has not typically provided foreign aid and then issued a tab to the recipient country because security assistance has been viewed as being given as part of achieving U.S. national security interests. What's clear is President Trump doesn't view Ukraine's sovereignty as a core U.S. national security interest, which is why he's asking for repayment. So as we look at the deal with Ukraine, I think it also begs a question of going forward, what else is the Trump administration going to expect from recipients of security assistance in exchange for the United States providing weapons, dollars, training, and more?
The president was asked if in conversations yet to be had with Russian President Vladimir Putin, if he would have to make any concessions in reaching a peace settlement with Ukraine. The president said he would not go into them. He was asked if he would describe them. Here was part of his response.
What concessions would you like to see?
Oh, I don't want to tell right now, but I can tell you that NATO you can forget about. I think that's probably the reason the whole thing started.
So that's not a Russian concession. That's taking something the Ukrainians themselves have acknowledged would be hard to achieve under the current set of circumstances. But that's a concession up front that freezes out one thing the Ukrainians would at least like to have on the table. So if they pull it back, at least they get something in exchange.
Sure, and the obvious thing would be Russia withdrawing from key swaths of Ukrainian territory or pledging not to violate Ukraine's sovereignty again. However, history is a guide here. Russia did sign ceasefire agreements, the Minsk Accords, with Ukraine dating back several years now.
Not once, but twice.
Twice they signed accords and twice they violated them. So even if Russia does make concessions as part of a negotiation, and that's a big if, the verifiability of what they're pledging is going to be really critical. And that's why when President Macron was here earlier this week, he said a deal had to be not just signed, sealed, and delivered, but actually verified based upon Russia's history.
And with absolute security guarantees for Ukraine backed up by the United States and Europe. Speaking of Europe, here's what the president said about the formation of the European Union. I'd like your comments on the other side.
The European Union's it was formed in order to screw the United States. I mean, look, let's be honest. The European Union was formed in order to screw the United States. That's the purpose of it. And they've done a good job of it, but now I'm president.
Well, Sam?
Analytically speaking, Major, the EU was not formed to, quote, screw the United States. President Trump has taken great issue with the fact that the EU, for example, on trade-related matters, acts as a bloc.
Right.
President Trump is quite transactional in how, for example...
He prefers one-to-one deals,
he does.
Not a bloc.
Personality-based, transactional approaches, bilateral trade agreements, and particularly when it comes to trade-related matters. I think he would be more optimistic about and would prefer more to negotiate directly with Germany or France versus having to deal with the bloc in its entirety.
And I want to take two things together. The harsh comments at times from President Trump about NATO, this very harsh assessment of what the EU was formed. This is deepening the sense of, if not crisis, anxiety in Europe about its future relationship with this administration.
And that's why we're seeing so many European leaders make the trek to Washington. We have the British Prime Minister coming tomorrow with a Trump-y agenda. The British Prime Minister announced earlier this week that the UK will be raising defense spending to 2.5% by 2027, and that they'll be cutting foreign assistance in order to pay for more defense spending. That sounds a lot like what President Trump is doing here at home from a foreign assistance perspective. And of course, he's called for European countries to shoulder more of the military spending and defense burden globally.
And I will quote the White House, that's the Trump effect. That's what they say. I'm not saying it's true or not,
and it
but
looks
that's
like it's
what
working.
they say.
Yeah.
Sam Vinograd, thank you for your perspective. There's some very important news coming out of West Texas. The largest measles outbreak in decades is happening there. One person so far has died. More on the disease that was once considered largely eliminated thanks to the power of vaccines. That's next. You're watching America Decides.
We also want to continue to emphasize that vaccination is the best way to prevent the spread of this virus and to prevent the severe complications.
Welcome back. That was some of what we heard from local officials in West Texas fighting to contain, they hope, a growing measles outbreak. Our Omar Villafranca is in Lubbock with more.
The press conference is just wrapping up here in Lubbock, and health officials here at Covenant were able to confirm that a school-aged child who was being treated here did die in the last 24 hours from complications from measles. This is the first measles-related death in this outbreak. They also went on to clarify some other information, that the hospitalizations that they do have here, everyone who is hospitalized and getting treatment is not vaccinated. Now, just for some background, this outbreak started in Gaines County, about an hour and a half away, in an unvaccinated Mennonite community, but that community does interact with the general public, and that's why we're starting to see this spread into other counties. Now, health officials here are saying the best way for people to prevent the spread of this is to get their measles vaccine. They're saying measles is very contagious. If I had the measles and you were across from me and you were not vaccinated or didn't have any immunity, 9 out of 10 times you would get sick with the measles. So they're continuing to monitor this. They are working not only with the city of Lubbock and also the community here in West Texas, but they're also working with the state, and they're in contact with the federal government. Side note, we heard that HHS Secretary RFK Jr. Was at the White House talking today about some facts. He mentioned 2 deaths. When we asked the health officials here, they are only able to confirm 1 death. He also mentioned that the hospitalizations were for quarantine. The doctors here clarified the patients who are here at the hospital, they are not in quarantine. They are actively receiving treatment, especially since it's a respiratory disease, for breathing, extra oxygen, things like that, helping them breathe. So we're going to continue to monitor this, and when we get more information, we'll let you know. Back to you.
Omar Villafranca, thank you very much. We're joined now by CBS News Chief Medical Correspondent Dr. John LaPook. Dr. LaPook, always great to have you at moments like this. We don't want to alarm the public. We want to inform. What are the most important things to know and contextualize about what we're seeing playing out in West Texas?
Well, first of all, it is so sad, Major. I mean, a death from a vaccine-preventable illness is especially sad. I have to say it's not particularly surprising to sort of put this in perspective. The measles vaccine was licensed in 1963. Before that, every year there were about 500,000 reported cases, probably 3 to 4 million cases in all. So many went unreported. And there were about 50,000, 48,000 hospitalizations. 1,000 people got encephalitis, which is brain swelling, brain inflammation, and about 400 or 500 people died. What happened after the vaccine came along, it just plummeted. You don't see that ever. It's just the most dramatic thing on the graph. It just goes down to the point where it was eventually considered to be eliminated. And to see it creeping back now, and especially in these pockets of parts of the country which are not especially immunized. You need 95% of the population immunized because it's so infectious, so contagious. You need about 95% immunized to get herd immunity. And that's dropped now to about 93% of the country being immunized. I think it's 92.7 as opposed to it used to be a couple of points higher. So it is slipping down, and especially in these little pockets where a lot more than that are not getting vaccinated, people are very vulnerable.
And Dr. LaPook, of course, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as head of HHS, what he says matters. It's scrutinized perhaps more intensely than a previous HHS secretary. He also said, in addition to the things that Omar Villafranca clarified, that measles outbreaks in our country are, quote, not unusual. Is that true?
It is true. There are pockets of these people who get infected every year, or often, intermittently. In places, we saw it in a Hasidic community. We saw it in other populations where they weren't getting vaccinated, and it was way less than 90%. It could be 50% or something like that. So you do see these pockets. The problem is that as you're seeing vaccine hesitancy increase and vaccine uptake sort of slip down, the voices from the people who are in power matter. And even if they're not saying not to get vaccinated, saying nothing in a situation like this is actually saying something, right? So, people need to understand that this is a highly contagious illness. It's actually much more contagious than the flu or COVID. And to put it in perspective, there is a double whammy here because not only is it highly infectious, but has a long incubation period. And Major, what that means is, with an incubation period of 10 to 14 days, somebody can be infected, not know it, travel around and infect other people because they can be infectious 4 days before they even get a rash. So they're infecting other people. On top of that, it's so infectious that somebody who's infected could leave a room and then that virus can linger in the air for a couple of hours, and somebody who's then vulnerable can become infected just 2 hours later, go into a part where the person has left a couple of hours before then. So, there may be people out there who think, and I understand this thinking, and I've heard it from people when you talk to people and say, there are risks of not taking it, not just to you, but to other people. And they say, look, I'm rolling the dice for myself or for my kid. And so that's my decision. And I understand that. But they should keep in mind, we looked at the numbers, and there are about 17 million immunocompromised adults and 2 million immunocompromised kids. And so you're not only rolling the dice for yourself, you're rolling the dice for them because they're relying on other people getting immunized for the herd immunity so that they're protected.
Dr. John LaPook, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it. Split on Doge, why some Republican lawmakers say they are at least mildly concerned about some of Elon Musk's attempts at cost cutting. Others are showing support. Our reporter panel weighs in on that and a lot of other things. That's next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. In a democracy, there's give and take when the government does some big things. And right now, the Trump administration, according to it, is doing lots of big things, and the public agrees. And there has been some answering back to members of Congress about the Doge, Department of Government Efficiency, and cuts to the federal workforce. Here's how some Republicans have either responded or heard from their constituents during either in-person or tele-town halls.
This is counterproductive, and it hasn't been it hasn't gone the direction that we would like to see it.
It's completely legal, or we wouldn't be doing it. Elon is an advisor. Every president has unelected, unconfirmed private advisors.
Elon Musk has contracts with the federal government. But he is also, I think, doing an effective job.
Conflict of interest! Show me!
I want to bring in our reporter panel. Shelby Talcott is White House correspondent for Semaphore. Jasmine Wright, a reporter for Notice. That's News of the U.S. Notice. Got that? So, Shelby, you have new reporting on what the president did just today, another executive order related to the Department of Government Efficiency. What did he do? What does it mean?
Yeah, this is essentially continuing to give Doge more power over the federal government, and this particular executive order directs agencies to implement Doge's cost-cutting efforts. So it says that agencies will begin to make public their travel plans and expenses as much as possible. It also directs them to start cost-cutting efforts. And so this is just really the latest executive order in a slew of executive orders that the president has signed in recent weeks, giving Doge more power.
And for any federal worker that I've met, they never travel first class. They don't travel business class. They travel coach. So I suppose this will be of some interest. And the idea, what is that there's some great waste going on within federal traveling or scheduling of meetings and whatnot?
Yeah, the White House's argument is this is essentially one small step in the overarching effort to root out fraud, waste, and abuse. And another part of this executive order is directing agencies to find that waste, fraud, and abuse and report back to the federal government on what they can essentially continue cutting.
Jasmine, from your perch at the White House and your visibility across Washington, how do you think all this is landing so far?
Well, I think that there is some confusion about exactly what Doge is doing and what their purpose is. I think that's why you saw Elon today kind of holding court at the cabinet meeting with President Trump and describing himself as kind of a highbrow IT services that Doge is specifically focused on technology, but also goes into waste, fraud, and abuse. Now, I think that one thing is clear is that even though they may have found things that people view wasteful, that could go to foreign aid, that could go to certain different things, they haven't actually identified things that are fraudulent in the actual term of the word. So I think that there's potentially some confusion. I think we saw Republican lawmakers go home last week and, as in that video, be faced with some real pushback as to what they're doing and what kind of all the calamity is around the federal government. And I think you also saw President Trump acknowledge, while maybe most of the cabinet really likes what Elon is doing, there are some that disagree, despite the White House really making an effort to downplay that reporting, that people were surprised about the email asking people to identify 5 things that they did or other actions taken by Doge. And so I think it's a kind of a mix. Now, the White House wants to say that it's really successful, but I'm not sure that that is exactly true when you go out into the rest of the country. And I'm not sure that lawmakers feel that that's exactly true.
And Shelby, what I find fascinating is the White House could, in this conversation, say the following. Well, we're going to send all the things that Elon has found to Congress, have them put in an appropriations bill, and we'll get those things knocked out when we refund the government on March 14th, when funding expires. We'll put that in a continuing resolution or whatever the appropriations vehicle is. That's wide open terrain to them. And yet I don't hear them saying that.
Yeah, what's actually really interesting about that is there have been lawmakers who have raised this. They've said eventually, at some point, Doge cuts are going to need a vote in Congress. And I actually asked the president a week ago if that was something that they would be interested in. And he said to me that he wouldn't mind it if lawmakers feel it's necessary, but he also sort of started to lament about why would Republican lawmakers feel that it was necessary. So I'm curious to see if push comes to shove, if that actually ends up happening and if the president ends up actually being okay with it.
Because, Jasmine, that is a process where if you want to be funding the government and you want to avoid a shutdown, and if there are these things that you mentioned are politically hard to defend or problematic to defend, you can get 60 votes in the Senate on that. If, in fact, they are what the president says they are.
Yeah, and I think that you've seen a Republican conference that's really willing to give into Trump's will and give him what he is asking for, not just on his cabinet, but, of course, the bill that just passed in the House last night. So, yeah, President Trump might have to, but I think this is also a major part of him really expanding that presidential power and actually kind of poking the courts to step in and try to expand what he can do via executive order. They don't really want to go to Congress. What they want to do is allow President Trump to do what he wants to do unilaterally. And
by executive power, strictly.
By executive power. And so I think that that is more of the motivation or more of the push to some of these executive orders that are most likely going to end up in the courts.
Shelby, it's often said in another context, we have the receipts. Well, there's a page that the Department of Government Efficiency posts on X that counts $65 billion. The Wall Street Journal has said it's nowhere near that. It's fractionally that amount. So at some point, these things are going to have to get beyond the advertising and get into the realm of the real.
Yeah, this is, we're a month in to a long process. Doge is technically supposed to go through 2026. So I'm curious to see what happens. But also, we've heard Elon Musk on more than one occasion now talk about how because they're moving so quickly, they're going to make mistakes and they'll rectify those mistakes. Now, we have seen them make some mistakes and quietly rectify them. What we haven't really seen is him come out and address a lot of those errors up front. And so the big question is, how are they going to continue addressing those? Is there going to be more transparency when they make mistakes? And ultimately, this is kind of Elon Musk's MO historically. He goes in, he breaks things. This is how he does things. Of course, it is different when you're dealing with the federal government. But he's acknowledged that mistakes are going to be made. Again, though, we're working with the federal government.
Shelby Talcott, Jasmine Wright, thank you very much. Great to have you with us. With tax season here, the Trump administration gears up to cut thousands of IRS workers. What that might mean for the millions of Americans who are preparing or may have already filed their taxes. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. The Trump administration ordered the termination of more than 6,000 Internal Revenue Service employees last week. Now, according to a federal employees union, that could include roughly 1,000 IRS workers in Kansas City alone. Donna Ginther is here to discuss the potential economic ramifications of this and much more. She is the director of the Institute of Policy and Social Research at the University of Kansas. And Donna, I want to let you know up front, as a proud University of Missouri graduate, our university's spirited sports rivalry will in no way contaminate this conversation. Kansas City. Kansas City, tell me about the federal workforce footprint in Kansas City and the surrounding area.
It's about 3 to 5% of all workers in the Kansas City metro area. There are 30,000 federal employees. A sizable number are employed at the IRS, but also in the Small Business Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, and then we have Fort Leavenworth nearby in Kansas City. So the metro area is home to many federal workers.
What have been the ripple effects so far of the Department of Government Efficiency's efforts to shrink the federal workforce there?
So when we look at, about 3,000 workers, or about 10% of the federal workforce, are probationary. So about 3,000 of federal workers in Kansas City are at risk of losing their jobs, and that's before any additional reduction in force. When I looked at job postings today on Lightcast, there were 2,700 jobs that required a bachelor's degree. most of these federal workers have a bachelor's degree, so it appears that there may not be enough jobs in the Kansas City metro to absorb the number of workers who are losing their jobs.
And I have read studies, Donna, that indicate that an employed federal worker has a multiplier effect in the local economy. What is it there?
The multiplier effect is about 2. So for every dollar spent on federal workers, you get 2 additional workers. So about 6,000 workers may be affected, and then $2 more in economic activity for every dollar spent.
So what are we talking about here in terms of spillover or domino effects in your region and possibly nationwide if these workforce reductions grow even larger?
Well, I'm concerned because, the Federal Reserve has been tightening, increasing interest rates to slow the economy and to calm down the labor market so it's not so hot. Well, so the SOM index, which indicates early recession, is ticking up these days. And so we were flirting with a recessionary labor market at the end of the last quarter. And now that we add more unemployment, we could face a recession going forward. But, in general, federal workers spend their money, and that's going to have spillover effects for any types of discretionary spending. If I were a federal worker now, there's 2 million in the United States, I'd be concerned about my job, and I wouldn't spend any money besides food and rent and necessities. And when you looked at consumption being 3/4 of gross domestic product, that can slow the economy really quickly.
So we opened the show, Donna, talking about the implication at the cabinet meeting today, coming from Elon Musk and then echoed by the president, that there are a lot of non-existent federal workers, that they're either dead or they don't exist and they're just getting paid or someone's getting paid. What I'm hearing from you is in the Kansas City area, they're all real.
That's my sense. They're all real. And, if you're leaving a job at the IRS, that's going to affect our tax returns and the processing of our tax returns or answering questions about our tax returns right at the beginning of tax season.
Donna Ginther, again, University of Kansas, excellent university, just a sports rival of my alma mater, the University of Missouri, and there's nothing wrong with that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Major.
As wildfires nationwide grow more fierce, and we know this, more frequent, job cuts at the U.S. Forest Service are worrying experts who are in this firefighting space. How could that impact our ability nationally to combat future blazes? That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. Thousands of workers who look after the nation's forests have been laid off as part of the Trump administration's effort to downsize the federal workforce. These layoffs are happening as wildfires have become more frequent and intense. Our Ian Lee spoke with fired Forest Service workers about this.
Show of hands, how many of you were qualified to fight fires? So you guys could all have been on the front lines this summer fighting fires if needed.
Yes.
Kelly Martin joins us now. She is the former chief of fire and aviation management at Yosemite National Park. Kelly, it's great to have you with us. I know you are in general an advocate for your brothers and sisters in firefighting, both at the federal level, state, local level. When you see these cuts happening to the Forest Service, what are your chief concerns and what work do you fear would be ordinarily done in this wintertime that's not being done in preparation for fire season?
This whole process of terminating employees has been very, very disruptive to our workforce. We've been advocating for a long time for reforms for the federal wildland firefighters. And the recent firings and terminations have really turned everything on its head and have paused really major efforts to do really good mitigation work in front of and before these wildfires this summer. And so all that is now in question in terms of the work that we normally do in the wintertime.
Kelly, it's been said by Elon Musk and implied by senior Trump administration officials that these reductions in the federal workforce are for poor performance or non-performance. In your experience, does that ever adequately describe those who do the work that you do and that you know your colleagues do?
You know, I think that this was indiscriminate and a decision that was made that is not beneficial, you know, to our workforce by cutting these temporary and probationary. And probationary is just a term for how long you've actually been on the job. It's not for performance at all. What that does is it really knocked the morale out of the overall workforce. And that's having a huge impact on our readiness to be ready for the fire season somewhere in the U.S. in less than 8 weeks. And so that is truly concerning for me from a safety standpoint of view.
Walk me through that preparation process. What goes on now that is now sort of been upended that prepares wildland firefighters for the coming fire season?
You know, normally this time of year, we're hiring our seasonal or temporary employees to help us fill out our crews and our engines and our hotshot crews. Many of these employees have now been terminated, and now they've been rehired. And so there's real confusion in the system as to who's considered, you know, a firefighter. Certainly there's firefighters that have firefighting in their job description. But there's so many other people that are supplemental firefighters that don't have fire in their job description that we really count on, that we really need their help and support. And so we've created a huge gap that's not going to be easily filled. This time of year, we also work with our state and local and municipal firefighters.
Kelly, I think we lost the connection with you for just a second or two. While you were talking, we were showing pictures of the Palisades fire and Eaton fires in Los Angeles. It's my understanding that you were one of the firefighters, one of the multitude of firefighters at the Palisades fire. If you could describe what that experience was like and how any of what we've been talking about in the shrinkage of the Forest Service or with wildland firefighters generally could compromise efforts to combat a similar fire should it occur.
We are seeing these large fires occur throughout the United States. So Southern California in January, typically where they see the Santa Ana winds, hadn't received any rain in about 8 months. California put out a call for assistance and help from other states to come in and assist them with their fire response. That's not normally our season of fire response. But we are seeing the need for federal response throughout the United States year-round now. These fires are not getting any smaller, and they're not getting any more less destructive. They're only increasing in size and complexity, and we're desperate for ensuring that we have a solid federal response for wildland fires this summer.
And Kelly, just briefly, you are a very experienced firefighter, more than 30 years. What was the Palisades fire like for you?
When I first saw it on January 7th on the news, I had never seen anything like this. And I really felt like throughout my 35-year career in operations and fire behavior, I really needed to be there on the ground to really understand the magnitude of devastation that I was seeing. When I got there, it was even beyond my experience to even comprehend what I was looking at. So I did a lot of investigative introspection about how do we approach these new fires and these mega fires and these destructive fires in the future, because a lot of these communities like the Palisades and Altadena, a lot of them were built in post-World War II during the housing boom. And so a lot of these lots are very small, a lot of shrubs between the homes. And once they get started under a really high Santa Ana wind with very dry conditions, it is a catastrophe waiting to happen. And that's exactly what I saw.
Kelly Martin, thank you very much for your expertise. I appreciate it. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.